On to the Washington Commanders, a team that does not have a 9.5 Vegas odds. In fact, the team that went 8-8 last year barely has Vegas odds of 6.5 wins. And again, we're in another Washington season where we just don't have clarity at the QB and confidence in the QB position. They were 20th in passing attempts last year, 22nd in yardage. They ran the hell out of the ball last year. They were 4th in attempts. If that surprises you, yeah, they were 4th in attempts. And they were 12th in yardage, so not the most efficient. And you'll see when we start talking about Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, their yards per carry were not amazing. But Sam Howell is going to be at the helm here, going at QB 30 in drafts. So I'm not going to even say what his overall is because it's down in the dumpers. But in the one start he did have at the end of the season last year, he was 11 for 19. He had 1 touchdown passing on 169 yards. He also had 5 rushes for 35 and a touchdown. He did throw 1 pick, but still ended up as a QB7 with 20-plus fantasy points for the week. So that's on a rookie season, late season start, a throwaway game, and you give yourself an opportunity now to start the season, get some full work with the ones, especially with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson for a whole offseason. I know I said this before in a short. I don't see him being able to give both those receivers 1,000-yard seasons. It's just not going to be. I mean, like, they may throw enough this year to do that because they may have to in behind in games, but their defense is still so good. It may keep the games lower scoring, and it may be a possession and clock situation as well. But I don't see him being able to throw the ball enough to give both those guys 1,000-yard seasons. However, I think he's going to be efficient and good enough to lead this team for the season at the quarterback. I know some people are saying, like, Jacoby Brissett's going to be in there by halfway through the year. I don't see a reason why you would do that. Like, bringing Jacoby in doesn't do anything for you. You're not getting an eye on what Jacoby could do for you in the future. Like, give your guy of your future that you drafted an opportunity for the full season. So I'm not drafting him. I'm not looking to draft him, but he affects some position and skill players that we are looking to draft in this league.
Well, I think that's a good point, and that's a fair assessment. Is that, like, I don't think anyone's really going to draft Sam Howell other than 2 quarterback leagues, but I do think that there's listen, the preseason game, he looked good. Like, he looked in rhythm with the offense. He looked like he was in command. But what I really like about this team as compared to last year, last year they brought in Wentz, and they still had question marks with Heineke, and they had a lot of question marks with that quarterback position. Jacoby Brissett is a legit backup. And so from a fantasy perspective, if you're worried about drafting Terry McLaurin or Jahan Dotson or Antonio Gibson, I don't think you need to worry as much, because if Sam Howell does struggle and they bring in Jacoby Brissett, Brissett can sustain those guys. Look at what he did last year with Cleveland. Look at the receiver production that they had with him there. But I would agree with you. I think that this team is going to be more about running the football. I did an early short, a month or 2 ago on Brian Robinson kind of being a breakout running back outside of the top 20 ADP. That I think he could break into that top 20 ADP, because they're going to want to run the ball. And I think that Brian Robinson, coming off of an injury, getting shot 3 times last year, especially in a muscle like the glute, which is, your power muscle. Guys, the glute is your muscle of power. If you don't have, look at every athlete, look at, everyone says the quad, but all those guys that have quads, they got glutes too. And so him losing that, I think he's always been kind of a power back in between the tackles. I don't know if his efficiency is going to go up, but I think he's going to get the number one in the early down work, and Antonio Gibson is going to be kind of used in kind of that running back out of the backfield. So I do think, even with the struggles that you might see at the quarterback position, the running back position is intriguing, because you're getting these guys really late in the draft. Like, I think
very late in the draft.
Yeah, if you have his ADP in front of you for Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson.
Well, I'll just finish on real quick and I'll get to the ADP on Brissett. The only thing I will say about Brissett, and just looking it up real quick, he is under 200 yards a game in his career. In fact, I'll take out the little outliers that he had here and there in some of those old, games where he came in but like when he was in Miami and got those starts in Miami, when he was in Cleveland last year, I mean, he had 163 yards per game in Cleveland. He had 116 yards in Miami in 2021 per game. He hasn't had over, 193 yards since 2019 in Indy. And he hasn't had a winning record. I don't like him that much as a backup. To me, he's a serviceable backup because he can lead a team and kind of do like a Garoppolo situation, but he's not going to go out there and throw the ball a ton in a game. The fact that he literally he has an average of his career at 136 yards per game. Like, he's not throwing. That's where it concerns me for the pass catchers, and I think it's better for the runners. But I digress. Back to Robinson and Gibson. Brian Robinson's RB31. Antonio Gibson is RB34. And they're going flip-flop for some reason in ADP. I don't know if it was a typo or if it's just turning out this way, but Brian Robinson's being drafted overall later at times than Antonio Gibson is. People are a little higher on Gibson because they feel like this team is probably going to be playing from behind a lot more. But I do like Brian Robinson. Although last year in 12 games, he did only have a 3.8 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns on the ground. And he wasn't really involved in the passing game whatsoever. He still he looked like the better runner than Antonio Gibson. They just had to be involved in the game so much. I mean, he had 50 more rushes than Gibson pretty much. And Gibson had a 3.6 yards per carry. So well worse than that. He just had one more touchdown. But Gibson, where he thrives is the reception. I mean, 46 catches last year and 2 touchdowns. He was pretty efficient with his catches. So I agree. It's like, if I'm going for a zero running back option and you're getting Brian Robinson, you're your running back 3 after you've already hit the likes of Connor and Akers and guys down in that list, you could get him so far down in the draft. And it's still a guy who's going to start. He's a starter in the NFL.
Similar situation. Would you rather have Brian Robinson or Raheem Mostert?
Oh, Mostert.
Okay.
Just because that offense it opens up the running game so much with the pass. That's why his yards per carry is so good. Plus, he's fast. He's so fast. He doesn't run between the tackles, doesn't need to. But that, again, like, I think Brian Robinson's going to have like 250 plus touches this season. You're not going to get that out of Mostert, I don't think.
Yeah, I think he could, and that's the reason I like him, is just volume based. And the defense is gonna be good enough to keep him in games, and they're gonna try to run the ball. I think last year, the inefficiency and the numbers were so bad last year because teams were stacking the boxes. They're daring them to throw, and they couldn't. We'll transition into the wide receivers, but I think this is a really good group of wide receivers. I think that if Sam Howell were to succeed, he's coming into a situation where they got 3 legit weapons, and legit weapons of different skill sets. And I think Curtis Samuel goes really under the radar. I think a lot of people are talking about McLaurin, a lot of people are talking about Jahan Dotson, but Curtis Samuel is the quote unquote poor man's Deebo Samuel. But he is used in a lot of the same ways. He's used on jet sweeps. He's used in the short yardage to get the ball in his hands and let him run. And I think that he can be really effective, and it's an extra tool. But we'll start on Terry McLaurin. Where do you kind of value him being drafted?
So Terry McLaurin's going wide receiver 24 right now around the leagues, and obviously it's different in each one here. I'm just taking Fantasy Pros rankings because they compile a couple of them together. 48th overall. I find myself every time I'm sitting in the round he's going in that 4th round, and I'm looking for a receiver. Doesn't matter where am I in the draft. I'm not looking at his name. I'm going around him to the next person usually, which is around Christian Kirk, Brandon Ayuk, George Pickens, Chris Godwin, guys that have more touchdown potential that could still finish similar in yardage to him. Like, he's a fantastic receiver. I just like the quarterbacks throwing to those other receivers. Even though there's guys, some of them,
like Pickens over him?
I think Pickens is going to have a fantastic year this year. I think he's going to be. I think you could see
Take your Georgia bias out of it. You like Pickens over this?
100%. I think that guy is a phenomenal athlete, and he finds the end zone. He's going to be like, Deontay Johnson had a ton of targets in the red zone last year, but I think Pickens is going to have a phenomenal year. And I'd rather take the upside of Pickens and the touchdowns there than McLaurin, who hasn't had over 7 touchdowns, or hasn't had 7 touchdowns since 2019. He hasn't had over 5 in the past 3 seasons. And it's not like his quarterback play is giving him anything else. And again, we're talking about a division that is very difficult. Like it's when those 6 games may be low scoring games against Washington each one here. So that's the only thing. I'd rather go with Jahan Dotson, who's got the touchdowns on the team, who had 7 touchdowns last year in only 12 games. The guy who in the red zone found himself open, he's seeing not the top coverage. He's going to probably be the one that's more likely open. And
he was extremely efficient.
Yeah, very efficient, but not so efficient that he can't repeat it. That's the thing. It's like he was so efficient because he's a good receiver. His routes are unbelievable, and he's got great hands. So when he gets open in the red zone in touchdown opportunities, and listen, touchdowns are king in football. It's a 6-point play. You know, if you're playing a PPR and your guy gets a catch for 10 yards, it's a 2-point play. He catches that in the end zone, it's an 8-point play. I want the guy that's going to get more 8-point plays from me right there. And I think that's going to be Jahan Dotson on this team. So to me, I haven't targeted McLaurin probably in like 2 of my mock drafts out of the 60 I've done already. I've taken McLaurin. But it's mostly because the range of the wide receivers that he's in that 4th round, because he's going about 48 overall, like I said, right, is like you have DJ Moore that's going 55th overall, Christian Watson, Jerry Jeudy, DeAndre Hopkins right after him. And then you have Kirk in 2 rounds later. So, like, to me, I'd rather go with something else in that 4th round, like maybe take a chance on a tight end, maybe take a chance on a quarterback, or take a chance on a running back in the 4th round if I already went receiver in the rounds earlier. Because I just, like, if that guy's going to be my wide receiver 2, there's other wide receiver 2s I like out there. And I definitely don't want him as my wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather reach and get some of the guys that are underneath him for sure. Like, I would take DJ Moore over him, and that's where I'm drafting. If I'm not gonna, if I'm drafting at one of the ends and one of the turns, and he's my second pick, and I'm not gonna touch the draft board for 20 picks or something, and he's in that kind of next grouping, I'd probably take DJ Moore over him just on upside. I would agree with you. I think Dotson is the guy to own here. I really do like Dotson. His ADOT was 14th in the league amongst wide receivers. His yards per catch, or his fantasy points per catch, was 6th in the league. He had a really, really efficient year. And this is an argument I can make for both McLaurin and Dotson, because I do think that they're going to be behind in games and they're going to need to throw. I think that they're going to be there's a lot of garbage time points there, because they're going to be playing from behind. And I mean, Dotson was king of that, right? Last year, how many garbage time touchdowns did Dotson have? And it was, it's great from a fantasy perspective, not great from, the Washington Commanders perspective, but, both those receivers should have numbers at the end of the year, even though the team might not do well because they're going to be behind in games. So, the teams aren't going to start running the ball in the 4th quarter when they're down 2 scores against the Eagles. They're not going to.
Yeah. I mean, let's just say Jahan Dotson last year was number 3 in fantasy points per target versus man coverage as well.
Yep.
Now, we talked about how many of these teams they're going to play have man coverage corners. And
but he's getting the number 2.
And exactly. He's not even getting the number 1, which is, again, why I like him. So to me, he only had 6 drops on the season too. That's a great number you want from him. He had a 50% contested catch rate. So for a guy his size, that's not bad either. I'm trying to see if I could find his, the amount of times he ran out of the slot, but I couldn't figure that out earlier. And then it's not significant enough, but that being said, like I said, and you said it too.
In the league. 121 snaps out of the slot.
Yeah, I see it right there. Slot snaps versus route run. Yeah. So to me, you said it and you put the nail on the head. He's not facing the top coverage. We already talked about how difficult these cornerbacks are going to be. Dotson's going to be the guy that's going to be open more times than McLaurin.
We got Dotson here.
We got Dotson. And then you said Curtis Samuel, and I'm glad you picked him up because I wanted to talk to him briefly too. This team's going to have to get creative to score points. If they can't plunge the ball up the middle, if they can't go between the tackles, and you got Gibson running out on the outside, Curtis Samuel's a weapon. He is a Swiss Army knife. He did have 38 rushes last year himself, and he had a 4.9 yards per carry on his rushes, more than those 2 other guys. So he's going to have opportunities. He had 5 total touchdowns, 1 rushing, 4 receiving. I like it, especially late game. Like this guy's going to be that underneath route guy because we all know, and we're going on to Logan Thomas here, that guy can't stay healthy. None of these tight ends in Washington can stay healthy and have for the previous season. So they're going to be running out there with 3 wide receiver sets, and Curtis Samuel is going to just gobble up the underneath from linebackers and nickel corners that he's going to be faster and quicker than, and you could get him for free. You could take the last pick in your draft on a guy like Curtis Samuel. I'm not saying do it because it's still Washington, and I don't think this team's going to score a lot of points this season, period. But that being said, keep an eye on him on waiver wires because if he starts jumping up the board, anything happens to McLaurin or Dotson, this guy's going to be valuable because he's going to be used.
I don't know if I've cursed yet on the podcast, but I'm really close to cursing right now. Because
burn, warning.
Goddamn freaking Carson Wentz. Fuck you. All right. Like last year, Curtis Samuel with Carson Wentz early in the season. Curtis Samuel was the number 1 receiver there, and I had him on my team. He was fantastic. He was scoring a touchdown a week. And then Carson Wentz got hurt, and Curtis Samuel disappeared from this team. And Carson Wentz, you're an asshole. Go and wear all your jerseys from all your teams, and I hope you don't get signed by anyone.
You saw that picture, right? He's literally wearing a piece of every single uniform of the teams he's played for.
He's like a high schooler.
I'm like, what are you doing? I mean, here's the thing about Curtis Samuel that and we'll move on to the tight ends here, not to say really tight end here, but you talked about it in the game log. He was targeted literally 30 times in the first 3 games. Then 7, 8, 5, 8. And then literally after week 8, he never saw more than 5 targets again. And that wasn't until week 14 and 15. He did miss a game with an injury, but it wasn't like he wasn't playing. I mean, he had 8 for 55 and a touchdown week 1, 7 on 9 targets for 1. He was all over the place. In fact, like he literally
they used him in rushes. And he had 30 rushes.
Well, he had 2 touchdowns he had 4 touchdowns in the first. Out of his 5 touchdowns, he had 4 of them in the first 2 games.
Yep.
So he's somebody just to keep an eye on. He could be somebody that sneaks in and gets a lot more uses than people expect, depending upon if they want him there. So, and that brings us to Logan Thomas, tight end 35. We're only bringing him up because it's our duty to bring him up. This guy is fallen from grace. Let's just say he's fallen from grace. I mean, we're talking about the 2020 tight end 9, was it back then, I think? Or was he higher than that? But, I mean, literally, I got to look that up.
He hasn't been healthy since.
Cannot stay healthy and hasn't been healthy since, and that's the problem. Like